Hello and welcome to my channel. So in this video I'm going to do my best to explain shadow work. So I've been wanting to do this video for quite some time, honestly. But I've been putting it off because shadow work is such a huge topic. Like, I was just like a bit overwhelmed, honestly, in terms of like where to start, how to approach this subject. I think there's a lot of stuff out there that's very like unhelpful and not very like clear. Like, I've read lots of things in it that I'm like, that doesn't really help me, and I wanted to do it in a way and do like explain it in a way that actually does it justice, that you can actually use, that's tangible, helpful, you know, in a way that is practical, you know. So this may not be the only video I do, because it's, like I say, it's such a big like topic that I actually think maybe I will do more parts to this, or maybe I'll add more to this later, so you might see a cutaway to a different time where I add more to it, who knows. But I just thought I'd put that out there. So I thought what I would do is start with actually understanding what the shadow itself is before we get into shadow work. So the shadow is a term that psychologist Carl Jung came up with as a way to explain, the shadow is essentially the parts of us that we are unaware of, that we are unconscious of, okay? And this is really important to understand this, because that is essentially what we are working with, is the unconscious material. So anything that we're not aware of, for example, like there are parts of us that we are aware of. So let's say, for example, in your conscious awareness, which is in Carl Jung's terms called the ego, that's our conscious mind, that's the parts we know we want. And then the unconscious is the shadow. So for example, let's say you might consciously know that you want money and you want abundance and you like having those things. But unconsciously, there may be a part of you that really enjoys scarcity. So that's in the shadow if you are unaware of that part of you that enjoys scarcity. So that's just like one example of like something that's conscious and something that's unconscious. So let's say we're talking about manifestation and we're trying to bring, new things in, and the amount of people that have set intentions for the new year, like New Year's resolutions, and they don't go anywhere. One of the reasons you could say why this is because they're unaware of their unconscious desires, and this is the shadow. So I'm kind of jumping ahead because I want to get to that in a minute, but that's an important key piece of why you might do shadow work, is exactly for those reasons. If we're not aware of our shadows, then we don't actually manifest what we consciously want. We are manifesting what we unconsciously want, because manifestation comes from our unconscious. So that is where that's the generative, creative parts of us, if that makes sense. So I might have jumped ahead a little bit there. So let's talk about how shadows are formed, like why we have shadows in the first place. So the shadow is the unconscious part of us, as we've already talked about. But the reason they form, or let's say how they form, is when a part of us that we may have demonstrated was not fully embraced or accepted by maybe our caregivers. This is one way a shadow can be formed. There's loads of ways, but the really common way is in childhood. So we are all of the things. We are infinite. We are both loving, kind, beautiful, and we are also, this might be hard to stomach, but we're also capable of evil. We're capable of we enjoy the so-called bad stuff as well. And this is kind of the premise of what it is to be aware of all of the parts, is to become very aware of the bits that we find harder to accept. Again, I may be jumping ahead there. So let's say, for example, when you're a child, you demonstrated aggression. Let's say you have a sibling, because this quite often happens with siblings, where you hit your sibling or you were mean to your sibling or something, and then your parent, your caregiver, was like, that's terrible, you can't do that, you're a bad child. And then what happens is that the aggressive part of you that was mean to your sister, let's say, that then gets stored in the unconscious, in the shadow, because your younger brain, child brain, learned that being aggressive was wrong, bad, terrible, and it resulted in separation and care from your caregivers, which from a survival standpoint is akin to death, right? So there are really good reasons why certain parts of our personality and aspects of us get put into the shadow, because at some point we learned that those parts of us were not okay, were not acceptable, and would result in potential death, because if your caregiver stops loving you, which you need as a child, that you will die, right? So there's a really good reason why we can be very averse to certain things and be like, no, I'm not like that. I'm not angry. I'm not aggressive. I'm not mean. I'm not sadistic. I don't like scarcity. I don't, all of these objections that we have probably came from a time where it wasn't safe to embrace those parts of us, because somebody, usually a caregiver, demonstrated. I don't want to say usually a caregiver, it can come from all sorts of situations. It can be teachers, could be loved ones, could be relationships, all sorts of things. But the point is to now get all of those parts that we have disowned, right? So we've disowned those parts of ourselves. They are still in us, but we pretend kind of that they're not there because it wasn't okay. So hopefully I've kind of maybe made sense of that, because that's kind of important to understand, like why shadows develop and what they are, and rather than just being aware of all of our whole selves, which is much, much bigger than we can possibly imagine. We are not who we think we are. So before I continue, something I do want to say here is a lot of what I'll be sharing and explaining and teaching, if you like, although I don't like to think of it as teaching, it's just more my understanding of things, has come off the back of Carl Jung's work and Caroline Lovewell and Kelly Brogan. So these are really great places if you want to go deeper into shadow work and understanding the shadow as resources. I mean, there's others, but like honestly, they're the main three for me that I have focused on, and I want to say that because I want to give credit where credit is due, coming off the back of really important work. Okay, so I've got some notes here. Let me just check that because I know there's so much I want to say. I don't want to like miss something and come off the video and be like, no, I didn't mention it. Okay, so one of the things that I have learned from Caroline Lovewell is that we want to work with the assumption that having is evidence of wanting. So the reason I say that is because let me rewind a second, actually. So actually, I'll come to that in a second. What I'm going to come to first is why bother doing shadow work? What is shadow work and why bother doing it? So we know what the shadow is. We know how shadows are formed. Why do it? What is it? So shadow work itself is about revealing those unconscious parts, becoming aware of our unconscious parts and integrating them into our conscious self. And by doing that, and the way we do that is by being in full acceptance of these parts that we say we don't like. So something to pay attention to is things that you're very averse to in others and in yourself. And that would demonstrate evidence of a shadow being there. So the process of shadow work is about recognizing those parts, seeing those parts, and not only just mere tolerance of, okay, I guess I'm, a bit aggressive. It's like we actually want to be like in full embrace and love and adoration. And I find, for me, like it's really helpful to find it adorable and to find it amusing. Like that's a really good gateway for me in terms of like, oh, it's so sweet and like funny that like I also okay, one of the shadows I have uncovered is that part of me, not all of me, and we'll come to that in a second as well, really enjoys being a victim. Like the victim status is super fun. Like, because you could say consciously, like, I don't want to be a victim. What are you talking about? That's terrible. Right? But being a victim allows me to get pity, attention, love without trying very hard. And I can totally see why some part of me enjoys playing that role, which is evidenced by the fact that I have done that, right? So now that I'm more aware of this part, it doesn't play out quite so much because I find it so innocently adorable. Like, why wouldn't I love that? Because there are really good reasons to enjoy that, right? That's just like one example. So by becoming aware of it, you find it doesn't play out quite so much because it's no longer this taboo thing that I'm not allowed to enjoy. Like, oh no, who could possibly enjoy being a victim, or who could possibly enjoy restriction, who could possibly enjoy, like, whatever it might be, or feeling powerless, you know, all of these things that were like, no, I don't like feeling that. It's like, well, okay, some part of you doesn't, but another part of you does. And the way to know, sorry, that's a mosquito. Sorry about that. Sorry, that's quite funny that happened. The way to know if a shadow is at play is if something keeps reoccurring in your life. So let's say, for example, you might consciously want lots of money, but you keep finding yourself scraping for it, like every single end of the month, you're like trying to like get money together and like pull it off and somehow pay your bills. There would be evidence of a shadow there that's really enjoying not having money. So this is why, so to come to the question of why would you do shadow work, is because according to Jung, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you will call it fate. So that kind of means that whatever is happening unconsciously is what is playing out in our lives. So we might repeat lots of fairly painful situations, like not having enough money to pay the rent, even though some part of you is deeply satisfied by this, which is the work of shadow work, is to recognize the part that's super enjoying this situation. The conscious part of us is not having the best time, right? It doesn't want to always be struggling for money. But the only way that we actually free ourselves from this dynamic is to really love the part of ourselves that does love this situation exactly as it is. And that is what shadow work can do. So sorry, I'm just trying to get another mosquito out of the way. Yeah, so that is why you might want to do shadow work. Let me see if there's more notes on that just to make sure that I have covered what I want to cover there. Yeah, okay, that is pretty much everything I wanted to say on that so far. Like I say, I think there will be a part 2 for this because I know I'm going to come off this and think of loads of stuff. Okay, so coming on to like how to identify shadows. So the first thing is to look around in your life. So because the generative part of us is the unconscious part, not the conscious part. This is, again, quite an important concept to understand. It's not our conscious selves that manifest, it's the unconscious part. So we need to get on board with our unconscious. This is super important, especially if we're talking about manifestation. Let's say you've had this desire to make lots of money, but you're not, then it would be like, okay, so look around and see like evidence of things that you say you don't want but keep showing up. That's a really good way of demonstrating or identifying a shadow at play, when something you say you don't want keeps happening. The invitation is to get very curious about what might be satisfying to you in that moment. And that is a big part of doing shadow work. So look around and see what keeps showing up. And instead of being judging of it, because this is what happens, people see it and then they go, oh God, that's terrible that oh no, like, I can't believe I'm actually the one that's manifesting this. Like, how awful and terrible. No, it's not about going into reactive guilt and shame around this thing you've manifested. It's doing the exact opposite, which is to say, like, oh my gosh, like, it's amazing that I have managed to create this situation again and again, because some part of me, not all of me, very important to know, but some part of me is deeply satisfied by this situation reoccurring itself again and again. So it's about getting curious, not, I cannot repeat this enough, not judgmental of it, because that is exactly what puts it back in the shadow. Does that make sense? Like, I hope that really lands, because it's the very thing that we think we need to do when we've identified or become aware of something is to shame it. But shame is the exact thing that puts it back in the shadow and doesn't integrate it at all. It just puts it back rather than integrating it into our lives and into ourselves. Okay, so hopefully I've impressed that point upon you, because it's huge, honestly. Like, I cannot stress how important that is, that it's about full embrace of like, isn't it adorable? Isn't it hilarious? Of course, like how deeply human, like it's so human to also enjoy these other so-called taboo kind of things. It's quite taboo to enjoy scarcity. It's quite taboo to enjoy drama, like whatever. Like there's loads of things that our society are like, no, it's terrible to like that. And yet we see it play out on the main stage, like of life, of our culture, of all these wars. We're like, we're not aggressive, and yet there's wars everywhere, right? Like it's kind of like, well, it's just that you aren't allowing yourself to see it because some part of you is deeply ashamed of it. But the problem is that when we're ashamed of it, it doesn't mean it doesn't play out. It just plays out without you being aware of it, and you actually have no real control over it because it's just happening. You're not aware it's happening. So in terms of doing shadow work, so first of all, it's about identifying it and then seeing it, and then allowing yourself, when you've identified it, to really just find it so adorable and lovely. And you can even go as far to just be like, feel the sensation in your body. This is what Caroline Lovewell calls existential kink, and her book is amazing. Oh my gosh, like definitely read it. It changed my life single-handedly. Like I read a lot. That book is top 3. It's great. So so she calls this practice existential kink, where you put a little bit of time aside to actually like feel into the part of you that really enjoys, let's say, scarcity, and to find the sensation in your body where you're like, ooh, like not only do I embrace it, but it's actually a bit of a turn on, right? That's what a kink is. A kink, by definition, is getting off on something that we find taboo. Otherwise, it's not a kink. If it's not taboo, and taboo means like something that we shouldn't really like, then so existential kink is like, she basically thinks that we have kinks for regular things, not just things sexually. Although I would say that one way you can identify some of your existential kinks is sexually as well. So I'll come on to that now, and I realise that what I'm about to say might freak some of you out, just bear with me. But in terms of identifying certain shadows, something I found really helpful, and again, like this is quite a polarizing thing to say, is to think about the things that do sexually turn you on that are a taboo, and that actually might be something that you are enjoying. So let's say, again, I won't go super deep into this because I realize it's complicated, but let's say some part of you, like, you know, you enjoy being tied up sexually, okay? Like that means that there's a part of you that enjoys restriction, right? So you can look at various different things that you know already turn you on in a way that you think, well, I don't like that in my normal life, but I like it in that context. Well, that still indicates that there's some part of you that's really enjoying restriction. And in that situation can be very healing, because you're actually embracing that part of you, as opposed to shaming yourself for enjoying the feeling of restriction. That's just like one example. And again, I won't go super deep into that because I don't want to like turn you off of this. Okay, so that's one way that you can identify shadows. Another way, so she has a practice called Deepest Fear Inventory. I won't go into totally what that is here, but what I'll do is I'll leave a link for it in the description for you to go through that yourself. But essentially what it is, it's about, you think about something that you want in your life that you aren't manifesting. Okay, so again, like the reason why you might do shadow work is because you want to manifest this beautiful, amazing life, and yet when you set intentions, it never seems to quite happen for you. That would be a time to do shadow work. That's when I do shadow work. It's like, because I might set an intention, then it happens, and I'm like, great, there's clearly no like shadows getting in the way there. But if I find myself setting an intention again and again, it never happens, that's when I'm like, right, it's time to do some shadow work here, to clear out all of the gunk, essentially. So this practice is thinking about something that you consciously want, your ego self wants. So let's say it's like, I want loads of money easily and effortlessly. And then you say, So you think about that, and then you put, dear universe, I deeply hate and resent having lots of money and it coming effortlessly and easily to me because I have a deep fear that and then you write out all of the reasons why you might not, like you'll see what I mean when you do it, but essentially you write out all of the different reasons why you actually don't want the thing. So you sort of like, of course I want that, why wouldn't I want that, that's crazy not to want that. But then when you do this practice, you realize like, oh, there's actually loads of reasons why I don't want loads of money. And I find it so helpful as a practice. And then at the end, you write out a little bit at the bottom. It's something like, I can't remember it verbatim, but it's something like, thank you for removing these fears, and I trust in your will for me, universe. Something like that, I can't remember. But again, I'll put a link in the description so you can actually go through this practice properly. But I find that to be really helpful because the problem I have with some of the exercises around shadow work that I have seen is that the exercises themselves don't really help. Like, so I've seen this quite commonly where people say like, oh, as a shadow work exercise, what are your limiting beliefs? And I'm like, well, I don't know. Like, I clearly have them, but I don't consciously know what they are. So doing exercises that actually reveal those in a way that actually helps, I think this is a really good way of doing that, rather than trying to consciously think of what my limiting beliefs are. I'm like, I don't really know. That's the problem. If I knew that, then I'd probably, be further ahead. So that's a really helpful practice anyway. Are there other practices? Let me have a look. I think that might be enough. There is more, but honestly, like those three in and of itself. So yeah, like looking at your life and seeing what's present, and then becoming very, very accepting of your exact circumstances as they are, instead of judging them, shaming them, saying it's wrong, bad, and evil, because that is exactly what puts it back in the shadow. That's one huge step. And then when you see a part of yourself that you're like, oh, it turns out I do quite like being mean. Like being mean, there's something in it that's like fun, or whatever, like whatever it is that you shouldn't like, you become very like adoring of that part. Deepest fear inventory, which I'll leave a link for that. And then yeah, like again, just to look at your own sexual kinks and see how that might correspond. Like I always find it especially interesting when the things that you sexually enjoy are things that you don't actually enjoy consciously in your normal life. So that really indicates what you call a divided will. So again, this is something Caroline Lovewell talks about a lot, which is your conscious part, which wants the money and wants the relationships and wants a big house and wants the amazing job, right? That's your conscious self. And then your unconscious self, which wants scarcity, which wants drama, which wants to stay small, this is what you call a divided will. So this process is about bringing both of these together, the unconscious, which is the feminine, generative, creative part of ourselves that actually is what creates our world, and unifying it with the conscious self, which is the part that wants all the so quote unquote good stuff, although it's not really good stuff, it's all good. We're here for all of it, right? But bringing those two together so they actually work together, and this is what you call the alchemical marriage, that both of these forces coming together rather than being divided and separate and getting very divided and separate results. And you'll know that this happens when you set intentions and they never seem to manifest. That's a evidence of a divided will. Okay, so I think for now, that is everything I wanted to talk about in terms of the realms of shadow work. So we talked about what the shadow is. We've talked about why you would do shadow work. We've talked about, what else we talked about? Sorry for everything. Yeah, what the shadow is, what shadow work is, why bother doing it, and how you can actually identify your shadows and do this work. So if you have any questions, I know I've thrown so much at you, but again, if you want extra resources on this, or there's any parts of that weren't clear, or you want me to explain deeper, like please do leave it in the comments, because I really think this work is so important. It's so important. And this is my first attempt really trying to explain it in a way that I think might be at least a little bit useful. So I appreciate there may be gaps in how I'm explaining it, and if there's any bits that you want more explanation on, please do share it, because I want to do my best to refine this as much as possible, if that makes sense. And your feedback really, really helps with that. Or bits that you found particularly helpful as well, like just so I get a sense of like what's resonating and what's still unclear. And yeah, any questions are super duper welcome. I'm just really grateful that you're here, and I just really hope this has helped. I really hope it has, because I know for me, when I kind of discovered some of this stuff, it really just changed my life in a very big way, in a very important way, and I think it's so misunderstood. And if I can just help even like one person understand this better, then I've done my job here. So thank you again. Let me know any feedback, any questions, anything like that, put in the comments. And if this was helpful, obviously, as always, liking, commenting, subscribing, all that stuff super helps me out. So thank you so much, and I'll see you all later. Mwah.